Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every Thursday, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life, their journey throughout the world of martial arts, and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today is the co-founder and CEO of JungoPlus, now one of the fastest growing international streaming media platforms in the ad-supported space. Prior to that, he served as Chief Content Officer of Crunchyroll, launching Second TV and KDrama.com, the company's first international live-action OTT platform. He's also a former 5-time World Karate Champion and Black Belt Hall of Fame inductee. His business career started in martial arts with teaching over 20,000 students, promoting over 1,000 to Black Belt. He spent 14 years as a coaching specialist for the San Francisco 49ers, even earning a Superbowl ring for the 1994 season. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. George Chung. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. Thank you, Brian, for having me on your show.
Oh, I appreciate your time, as always. And what I'd like to do is jump right into it. And with all my guests, I want to go back to the beginning. I want to know where that first spark was, that first interest that led to your journey in the world of martial arts.
That's a great question. I actually started when I was 12 years old.
Okay.
I was living in San Jose, California at the time, and a martial arts Taekwondo school opened up near my home. And I knew enough about Taekwondo to know that it was a Korean martial arts style. I'm actually half Korean and half Japanese. And, growing up, in San Jose, I grew up in a time that there were not a lot of Asian people in my neighborhood. I think there was a total of 2 or 3 Asian people at my school growing up, out of a school of, several hundred. Mm-hmm. And I always had this desire to learn more about my culture. And growing up, having that void of not really knowing, where your family is from, and primarily because both of my parents raised us until that time, in a very American style way. My mother was a second generation Japanese, and grew up speaking English. Obviously, my father, Korean, had tremendous pride of becoming an American citizen, and really wanted his children to grow up with this all-American idea, primarily because of where he came from. He came from North Korea and knew that he was never going back, or did not want to go back. So it was all eyes forward in this new land of America. And so he really wanted his kids, to grow up to become American. But growing up, I obviously knew that, I was a little bit different because of other kids didn't look like me. And so learning martial arts in the beginning was truly about understanding more about my culture. And obviously at the time, martial arts was pretty cool to learn. So I started Taekwondo with an instructor named Ernie Reyes, who obviously at this time is very, very famous today. Yes. But at the time, Ernie was, 28 years old, working as an assistant instructor for a school called Choi's Taekwondo, owned by Dan Choi. He had just moved from Salinas, California after graduating from college. He was a star athlete, growing up, but had this tremendous love and passion for martial arts. So I probably could not have started with the great, even if it was by design, training under one of the greatest masters in the world, being my first instructor and eventually becoming my mentor in the martial arts.
Wow, that's really cool. I've had the honor of meeting him one time. I met him and Ernie Jr. at the Diamond Nationals, and I think it was 1991 or 1992. They were there promoting the movie Surf Ninjas. And so I got to meet them and get pictures and autographs, and just amazing people. So once you got into it, what made you want to stick with it? What kind of kept you involved and kept your interest?
When I first started martial arts, I was not very good at it. I would say that I had average coordination. I played some sports. Mostly it was Little League baseball, but I would not be what you consider an athlete. Martial arts training was something that I had to work hard at, and in the beginning it was pure recreation, joy, fun. I wouldn't even call it a passion yet. It really wasn't a passion yet, but I loved it because it was something that I could do that brought me great happiness. Learning martial arts at a time when martial arts were still kind of what we would consider in this old school fashion. So at the time, I was 12 years old, and I didn't want to take the children's class because most of the kids in the class were 8, 9, and 10 years old. They were a little too young. And the adult class, all of the adults were 18 and over. But that was the class that I really desired to train in. So from the beginning, I took adult classes from day one. And it was a great lesson because you can imagine at the time in the 70s, there was no holding back of pain and punishment. You train like everybody else, and today you would call it dangerous and somewhat irresponsible.
Yep.
But back then it was just the way that we did it.
Yeah, I know. I've had so many instructors tell me that if they taught like the way that their instructor did in the 70s and early 80s, they'd probably be in jail right now. So.
But it was great learning to train that way because I had the opportunity at the school at the time to train with not only great, passionate instructors, but also it taught me so much about the world because Ernie was really the head instructor at the school because Master Choi he was the grand master, but he really didn't teach.
Okay.
Ernie taught most of the classes, but we had the opportunity, on Tuesday nights or Wednesday nights, we'd have different instructors. And so it was really interesting. I had 3 instructors that were very, very different. I had one instructor named Hugh Van Dong, who's Vietnamese, but he studied Bando, which is a Burmese martial arts, and trained in the 60s in this very old school kickboxing style. And it was brutal training. And so his approach in teaching us was in this very brutal old style, hit your shins with a piece of wood type of training. It was pre-Makiwara board or cool century equipment wave masters. We would just train to condition shins and elbows and knuckles. And then we had an instructor whose name was Reza, he literally looked like, imagine a modern day version of Fabio, with this, long hair. He was, at the time I thought he was 10 feet tall, but he was probably, 6 feet tall, muscular. Reza was Iranian and was just masterful in his moves. And then we had other instructors in the class, but to have instructors from different parts of the world. And, I'm a 12-year-old kid learning from, an instructor from Vietnam, an instructor from Iran, Ernie Reyes. And it really gave me an appreciation of learning from people with such diverse backgrounds, all teaching the same art with a different approach. And I really started to appreciate and start to fall in love with the training because the training became like an adventure. It wasn't just going to class to sweat. It was an adventure, hearing the stories and training. And it's almost like when you watch these old school kung fu movies, when they would make their students go through these crazy drills. These drills were just a part of the way that we trained. And again, for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid, it was something like you would only read in books. And it was something that it was so memorable for me that I think that began this love that I had for martial arts. And it wasn't about, the pain and the crazy training. It was about doing something that really made you feel good about yourself and started to bring confidence. And really, that's what started to light the fire of my passion toward martial arts.
Wow. And I love how you talk about that with the multiple instructors and different styles, because, I hear so many stories about the old school instructors where they were so restrictive on only our style, only our school, and kind of shunned away from sharing things. And you had a few of the other ones who were against that, and they liked sharing ideas and stuff. So it's really cool that you ended up in that school where they were able to do that and were a little more open.
And I credit that to Ernie Reyes because I've always said this, throughout my life, because, I met Ernie Reyes in 1974. So, you can do the math, right? It's a long time. But I've always said this. Ernie Reyes could have been a basketball coach, a football coach. He chose martial arts. But whatever he would have applied his teaching method and coaching style to, and I use this term coaching, not to take any respect away from a martial arts mastery of their art, but Ernie knew how to coach and he knew how to bring the best out of young talent. And he really, if you think about it today, the influence that he's had going on 50 years of teaching, the influence that he's had in martial arts, from tournament champions to demonstrations to movies to media, it's amazing. And, it all started in this little school in San Jose, California.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's, like I said, such an amazing impact. And it's just, like I said, I only got to meet him. I never actually got to train with him, so I can't imagine that. But I'm wondering what level did competition start for you? Because I know that was a big part of you. You were a national champion numerous times. So what belt level and kind of what was your go-to for competition?
I first started competing in tournaments when I was 13 years old. I think it was a green belt, and I went to my first karate tournament. I think it was like 1975, and I had to fight in this division. At the time, it was 12. It was just called boys 12 to 15. And it was intermediate green to black belt, right?
Wow.
And I remember, and again, I wasn't that good. I really wasn't that good. But I kind of eked my way into the semifinals. And, I won my first couple of matches. And then they said, hey, you're fighting in the semifinals. It's just going to be you and two other guys. Well, it's me, 12 years old. I'm not that big, and then there were two other kids, and there was a kid that was 15, but he was a big 15-year-old, right? And another kid who was a black belt who was just amazing. And I didn't have a chance. But what I remember coming away from that tournament was fear. And I was actually afraid of being hurt, I wouldn't even say afraid of being embarrassed. There was just an actual fear that these kids were just going to pound me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did not like that feeling whatsoever. I did not like that feeling. It wasn't shameful. It was not, because again, I was a pretty aware kid. It's like, these kids are older than me. They're obviously trained longer than me. They're better than me, but here I am, and this is what I have to do, right? And so I think part of that began to sink in, that I didn't like what that feeling felt like, right? And I did not want to be afraid. I did not want that feeling to ever happen to me again. And again, I continued my training, and around the time that I got my black belt, I had been very involved as a kid in musical theater. So I always had a background in theater, and that desire to be on the stage and to perform on the stage. I'd done that, probably from the time I was 8 years old all the way through, my teenage years. I had done that, and I really loved being in theater. And I remember when we started looking at forms, we first started looking at a book that had just came out called Dynamic Kicks, from a guy by the name of Chung. Mm-hmm. And we just went through that book, like, page by page, wanting to be like Chung, doing all these kicks. This is pre-tricking and all of that, right? We just paper. And we saw that, and we said, we want to be just like Chung. And he was living in Los Angeles. And there was a tournament that was happening. And again, this is probably 1977. I just gotten my black belt. And there was a tournament that was happening in Los Angeles called the Hollywood Action Contest. And what they were doing, they were, people would come out and do demonstrations. And what I did was I put together a musical form, the first of many,
mm-hmm.
To the theme of Rocky, but it had different elements. It had forms, and it had breaking, and it was think of it like a one-man band demo is what it was.
Okay.
And here I am. I'm 15 years old at the time. I don't think I was even 16. And I competed in this tournament. And at this event, it was like, this was pre-demo teams. It was just masters going out with their students. And it was, if you can imagine this, Hee Il Cho, Jun Chong.
Wow.
It was all these masters from their studios competing in what was then a demo contest, right? A demo contest. And I had, the blessing of my instructor, Ernie Reyes, put together this form. And it was like, there was not a chance in hell that, I wasn't going to come out with anything, because, like I said, I was a 15, 16-year-old kid, but the judges weren't karate instructors. The judges were celebrities. And the judges at the time was Barbie Benton, who was a Playboy playmate,
yep.
and James Caan,
wow.
who was a black belt in karate, who became a big movie star,
mm-hmm.
still is alive today, and a karate master named Tak Kubota.
Wow.
And they were the judges. And so we all did our stuff, but I came out with music, right? I did a little bit of gymnastics, cartwheels and aerials and karate and board breaking. But because I had my background in musical theater, I knew that everything had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, a finale. It had to have an actual ending.
Mm-hmm.
Where back then martial arts was like break and then you walk off, and it wasn't really a put together performance. So I had a put together performance, and lo and behold, I won the event.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it was like here are your heroes, Heel Cho and Jun Chung. They're looking, what the hell just happened? why are we even here now? It's like, when I think back of it, it was kind of strange and bizarre. It was the first development of adding showmanship and theatrics into martial arts, and that really became one of my first starts in seeing that I could win something. Because prior to that, I had done some tournaments and I had done forums, but I never really won anything big. So that took us to a point where suddenly Master Reyes now said, we're onto something pretty cool, and he loved drill team, marching bands, the precision units, and he began putting together routines with martial arts, band and precision movements. And then I would throw in this theatrical flair. And by the way, always had to add in music. And it was whatever the flavor of the month was from. And don't forget, we're talking the 70s,
yeah.
So it was disco. And we would put together these things. And this was prior to what they have today as demos.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would put together these skits where we would actually do like almost theatrical style skits done with music, done with martial arts. And it was kind of unheard of at the time, because again, we're talking 1977, 1978 period. And it started to blossom into what we know today as the West Coast demo team.
Right.
Those were some of the early hints that we were onto something kind of cool.
That's just cool to be a part of the beginning of that whole thing. I mean, talk about just being at the forefront and having the knowledge just to do that. I mean, that's so cool that you got to be.
Brian, for this team, it was not only having an opportunity to train, but something more important, and I can really appreciate this today, was Master Reyes encouraged us to become creative. He encouraged us to try new things. He encouraged us to grow. I can recall him bringing in Filipino stick fighting instructors and boxing coaches just to widen our understanding of martial arts, kind of in the spirit of Bruce Lee, of being able to expand your palette, that one art is not the only way.
Right.
And it had a tremendous effect on us as martial artists, but also in the development of that team.
Okay. And how long did you stay with Master Reyes, and then did you branch out into other styles? So
we had put together the team, in the 70s, and we started touring as the West Coast demo team. And I think it started like 1978.
Okay.
And I was with the team all the way into the early 1980s. I began competing on the national circuit in 1979. I was still in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I started competing, and again, taking, I was still doing the demos, and then the forms itself started to advance into much more what we call creative forms. And, rivalries began, and, the East Coast, West Coast, Chung
yeah.
rivalry. And it really allowed me to start to travel nationally. And around that time is when I met Cynthia Rothrock.
Mm-hmm.
I was, like I said, I was still a very young man. And Cynthia and I became friends and training partners. And I encouraged her to move to the West Coast, which she did, to continue her training. And around that time in the early 80s, Cynthia and I decided that we'd open up a school together. And at the time, we departed from our relationship, with the West Coast organization. And unfortunately, for many, many years, we were estranged from each other, and
okay.
Part of that is just, you got to remember, part of that is you're young,
yeah.
and it's emotional, and,
right.
Leaving your teacher. Today, I'm so proud to say that I love Grandmaster Reyes like a father. I will always treat him, with that respect that he deserves, as my master, as my mentor, literally as a second father to me. But in those earlier years, it was tough. because, we were separated. Cynthia and I had our own school, kind of doing our own thing, one town away. So there was a little bit of crosstown rivalry, but it was a part of growing up, so to speak. So I left that organization in like 1982, 1983 to move on to my career in teaching, and that's when that began.
Okay. So what made you want to teach? What kind of drew you to the teaching aspect of martial arts?
I never wanted to teach.
I've had so many guests give that answer.
and I don't mean that in a way that not because I don't like to teach.
Right.
And that's not the reason. I never had my sights set from a career path of being a martial arts instructor. I thought I was going to be a radio DJ or a news correspondent or work in media. And if you had asked me, back in, when I was a kid growing up, what do you want to be? I wanted to be an AM DJ on the radio. That's what I wanted to be.
Nice.
Right.
Wolfman
and
Jack.
exactly. And it's funny because I still to this day, I have a slight lisp. And so S's, and growing up, I had to have a little bit of speech therapy because S's and SH's and the name, and my name, George Chung, there's a lot of sound, which I struggled with. So growing up, I gave myself a pseudonym that would not have to have any S's and H's. And it was Randy Randell.
Randy Randell. Nice.
So it was like 90.5 AM radio, Randy Randell on the dial. It's the Eagles, and coming up next, it's Steely Dan in Asia. It's
That's
5
awesome.
past the hour. So that was kind of my career path I thought I would do. But I always tell people the success of my martial arts school, I always say, was because I probably had a better personality than the karate instructors down the street. So I was a little bit kinder, nicer, and more fun to be around. I also incorporated a lot of music, and today what is the norm back then was very non-traditional. I never wanted my instructors to even call me master. It wasn't until many years later on when I really had multiple schools that the whole master thing even came in. But for years, I just wanted to be George. And to this day, I still am much more comfortable when people address me in martial arts as George.
Nice.
But at the time, we were just having a good time and having a lot of fun, and I was successful at it. And it kept me in that game. And what it did was it provided a great living, a lot of fun. But I always knew that there was something that was missing. I just didn't know what it was back then.
So how long did you teach, and how long did you run schools?
So I taught from like the early 1980s, all the way until the late 1990s. Two things changed my career path. Was in the late 80s, I thought I wanted to be an actor. Thought I wanted to be an actor, like a lot of karate kids at the time. At that time, Cynthia had already started to take off as an actress, in her career. She was having this amazing career. I too wanted to be an actor, but, I look back at the skill level that I had. I would probably have been a good stage actor, but just did not have the chops to be a movie actor. But, every person with a black belt back then wanted to be Bruce Lee.
Right.
So I made a few low budget movies back then. I like to say that when people look at my movies and they say, man, were those B movies that you made back then? I say, no, my movies were more like L. So,
that's great.
But it taught me how to make movies. And I made 4 movies, but it taught me how to make a movie, how to direct a movie, how to edit a movie. And ultimately, the greatest skill it taught me was how to sell a movie, because my movies were so bad, I couldn't get a distributor.
Okay.
And so I ended up having to distribute the movies myself. So going back, to the late 80s, I was actually part-time in the karate business and part-time going to film festivals trying to sell these terrible movies that I made.
Okay.
And I always kind of had this dream that I wanted to be an actor, but by the early 1990s, that was kind of over. And I had one little school in Los Gatos, California, and I have a friend of mine who came to me who was a banker. Who, when I say banker, he actually worked at a bank, in the economics, in the finance division, doing economic forecasts. But he was a martial artist by the name of Anthony Chan, who's a wushu master. And Anthony came to me and said, "Look, I know how to run a business, but you know how to make it fun. Why don't we team up and do this together?" And Anthony at the time we were kind of rivals coming up, in martial arts competition. but we had tremendous respect for each other. And Anthony Chan and I took on the one little martial arts school that we had in Los Gatos, California in 1989, and we turned that into 11 dojos by the mid 1990s, with thousands of students around the Bay Area and in Southern Nevada. And around that same period, I had a student that I was training in martial arts by the name of Ronnie Lott, who was at the time was an up and coming football player for the San Francisco 49ers. I was just his martial arts instructor, and he started bringing in other players to train. And I actually remember, it was actually, believe it or not, it was Cynthia Rothrock that actually told me this. And she may not even remember this, but Cynthia used to do a lot of personal training. And I remember when she would train her students, this was like pre-aerobics and cardio fitness. She would kill her students and they would just be dying at the end of the workout. And she told me, she goes, look, you got to kill these guys, not physically kill them, but you got to make them walk out like, this is the hardest thing that they've ever done. You got to challenge them, right? And you know how to make it fun and challenging and mentally challenging, but you got to really do that. And I went from being, an instructor that, that always taught a great class to someone that knew how to just turn up the heat, really turn up the heat, and created a very, very intense workout that incorporated a lot of drills. But what I had to do was to keep their interest, because they weren't karate people. Rather than teaching the same thing every day, I taught a completely different lesson every single day.
Wow. To
keep them motivated and challenged. And around that time in the 1990s, there was a player by the name of Charles Haley, who was a rookie at the time. This is a guy that's gone on, if you were a football fan, Charles Haley went on to go into the Hall of Fame and win 5 Super Bowls. At the time was just young, angry, hard to get along with football player who was enamored by Ronnie, loved Ronnie, but was very difficult for coaches to work with. So in the offseason, Ronnie brought him to me and said, look, George really helped me, martial arts, and I want you to train with us. And I started training with Charles. And one day he said to me, he goes, really like, what you're doing. And this is what I love about these guys, because unlike martial arts today, where you would never say anything about your instructor doing something wrong, he said, man, I think it's really cool what you do and everything, but how's this going to help me? Really? How's this going to help me? And then I would give the answer that everyone, well, Charles, you have to think about how you can cross over. And he was like, I don't got time for that, to figure that shit out. Literally, that's what he said. I don't have time to figure this shit out. You figure it out. So I literally said to him, Charles, what is it that you do? He goes, I'm a pass rusher. I said, okay, Charles, I'm a martial arts guy. I have no idea what a pass rusher is. So he said, let's go and watch film. And I began that journey in 1989, 1991. And started to devour football tape and film and everything I could. And I looked at it like a fight. And what I realized was, in football at the time, watching those defensive linemen, when they go up against an offensive lineman, it's hand-to-hand combat before you go on and sack the quarterback. And I said, okay, I'm going to take these moves. I'm going to break down these moves, but I'm going to break down the moves as if it's a fight. So instead of a jab, you have a slap, and instead of a rip, uppercut, you have a rip. And we would have all these things. And I began training the football moves only for the football moves. So we would have a basic warm up. And then it was like, think of it like football karate, only for football. And we started seeing tremendous results. And suddenly I started getting more and more top level athletes coming to me. Ronnie Lott, Dwight Clark, Joe Montana, Bill Romanowski, Charles Haley. It's a who's who. Wow. It was literally a who's who. So I got to a point to where I got a call from the team president, Carmen Policy, who said, you have like 25 of my guys over at your little karate studio. If you guys have a earthquake, I'm screwed, right? Why don't you just come down and train the guys at the 49er facility? And that was 1990. And I officially started traveling with the team, in 1994 when we won the Super Bowl. And I stayed there until 2004, so 14 years.
Wow.
And over that time, refining what I learned with martial arts to a point where I became a training specialist, training guys specifically for positions. I went from defensive line to offensive line to DBs to linebackers, free safeties. Every element of and every aspect of football had a certain skill set that I would be specializing in. For quarterbacks, it was footwork and evasion. for running backs, it was high knee stepping and side to side movement. For D line, it was pass rush. For O line, it was containment. For DBs, it was bump and run. For wide receivers, it was breakoffs, and on and on and on and on. And I was able to work with the greatest coaches in the world, like Bill Walsh, and it taught me something brand new, which was how to function within a team environment and to throw out this idea that you are the master, you are the guru, and work within a team environment, and that your contribution is one of many contributions to make a great team. And it was the greatest learning experience of mine to be able to work in a team environment. And, that's how I transitioned from being a karate instructor to becoming a football coach. And eventually in the late 1990s, I was coaching, many, many players. And one of my players was a guy by the name of Joe Montana. Mm-hmm. And I was getting this idea of getting back into media, which is almost like another story. But where it ends is around 1997. Before I started my entertainment business is when, my teaching kind of officially ended, was in the late 90s when I really started to transition into media.
Okay. So I got to ask then, did any of the players that you worked with that did any of them stick with martial arts maybe after their playing careers and continue with it?
I think all of them, I had dinner with a player a month ago that I trained back in 1998. No, 1998, I trained him, and he came to me because he's 50 years old now and he has a son, and he wants his son to train in martial arts. And so I think many of them are doing it, but a lot of them have also passed it on to their kids and their next generation. And it's opened their mind to that this is another way to make themselves better.
Definitely. Cool. So you kind of mentioned the media thing. Now kind of talk about the media thing and how you blended martial arts into that.
So, end of the 90s, I had my daughter at the time was 7 years old. If you can imagine, you're a parent. This is, again, pre-YouTube and internet. What you could watch on television was basically PBS. And PBS had two shows that my daughter watched. One was Sesame Street and the other one was Barney. And literally I would watch Barney every day, and I was like, somebody just take a baseball bat and end it for me right now. Please, please. And at the time, Power Rangers had just come out. And I said to my wife as a joke, if I can combine karate from Power Rangers with Barney, might have something interesting. And she said, well, why don't you do it? You know how to produce, she was like, come on, just don't talk about it, do it. So, I'm literally training Joe Montana one day and his wife. And I said, hey, I have this idea of taking, these lessons that I teach you and the kids. And, I have a background in media, and they knew that because I produced some television shows, and they had seen some of the stuff. Because at the time I was also producing for the 49ers, an in-house coaching show. I said, I have this idea, and I just kind of don't know how to do it and put it together. Would you like to kind of help me? And Joe was like, I'm in. Tell me what we need to do to help me. And so we put together a company, and we actually raised some money, and we made this amazing TV show that at the time was called Kangarati, starred the late Pat Morita from The Karate Kid.
Yes.
Made about 30 episodes that aired on PBS, won an Emmy Award, and it transitioned me out of martial arts into becoming a full-time television producer. And, got the bug, and that's where I began, no longer teaching martial arts. And that began my official journey into becoming a television producer, and, was a television producer for many years until I transitioned into this amazing adventure that I'm in right now, which is streaming media.
And let's talk about that, because I know JungoPlus obviously does so much more than martial arts. But one of the whole reason I found you was because of the new thing with Black Belt Theater, which is so cool. So just talk a little bit how JungoPlus started, and then how how Black Belt Theater started with you guys.
This is going to sound like a sad story, but there's believe it or not, there's some inspiration and motivation in this. So at the time, I had this company called American Champion Entertainment. I was very young still, and I say young, I mean, by age, I was in my 30s, but I had so little experience in running a business. I had so little experience. I had a lot of great ideas. I know how to put things into action, but I didn't know how to run a business. Started that company, and that company ended up, we ended up dissolving that company in about 2000, 2001. I was still coaching for the 49ers, and I still owned the studio. So, I still had a good lifestyle, and so I continued to do that until about 2006. And in 2006, we experienced 2005, we experienced one of the worst football seasons with a coach. And we went 2-14 that year. And remember, I had lasted 14 years at the 49ers. I survived 2 owners, 3 head coaches, 4 presidents. I mean, nobody lasts that long. The karate instructor would never last that long at a football team, right? So 2005, 2006, my 49er career was over. I had dabbled in some other ventures. I was promoting boxing, producing television for boxing. But I was, in a sense, I was lost. I was lost because remember, I had already walked away from martial arts. I couldn't go back to teaching because I had sold my studios. That was gone. It wasn't like I could go and get another football job because it was so specialized what I did, right?
Right.
So specialized what I did. I was burned out of teaching, and producing was fun. I was making good money, traveling around, but my heart really wasn't in it. It was not in it, but I was pretty good at it. So I was producing, boxing, and that was kind of, how I was, making a living. And around 2006, I'm flying back from New York back to San Francisco, and I'm on an airplane, and I'm sitting next to a guy, and he said to me, he goes, "Hey, what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a TV producer." And he goes, so am I. He goes, "You know what I hate about this business?" I said, "What?" And he goes, "That I no longer tell people what they can watch." I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he goes, "Well, the way all this shit's going right now, these 14-year-old girls that watch this thing called YouTube, they're the ones that are now in charge. They figure out what they want to watch, It's like, why do they need me? This YouTube thing. You ever heard of this YouTube thing?" And it was just like a light went on in my head. I'm like, oh my God. And this guy was like a senior level media executive, And I thought to myself, man, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to wake up one day and the world is like, it's like, what is this thing called the YouTube and the Facebook? I didn't want to be that guy. And I was scared to death because I'm thinking to myself, in 5 years, am I just going to be completely irrelevant? And is the world going to go so fast that I didn't stay up? And I literally went home that night and I told my wife the story and I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm totally lost. And she goes, maybe what you should do is go get a job. Wow. And not to go make a living, but in her mind, it was, if you want to do something so bad, just go learn it. But George, you can't just go start a business if you don't know it, because you've said to me before, you had a failed entertainment business because you didn't know what you were doing. Go work for somebody. Go figure it out. You're smart. You're still young enough. Go figure it out yourself. And so I'll never forget, you know what Craigslist is?
Oh, yeah.
I went on Craigslist that night and I started looking for jobs. And there was a job that was this thing called New Media, IPTV. And they were looking for someone that had experience in multicultural television. That's me. I knew how to produce multicultural television because I had produced 200 episodes of 49er programming in Spanish and Chinese. I'd been producing boxing, MMA in different languages. That was me. So I took a job after this amazing career that I've had up to this point, owning karate studios and doing all these great things. I took a job in Los Angeles, California at the time for $57,600 a year before taxes.
Okay.
But I lived in Northern California. And so I had to drive every Monday, 4:00 in the morning, drove to LA and would work at an office in Studio City, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And on Thursday night, I would drive back to the Bay Area. And I did this for a year, every single week.
Wow.
And because it was tight, I was making $57,600 a year. I still had to support a family. And my wife works, but I had 2 kids and a mortgage and all that stuff. I had to watch every penny, and I literally, I'm in my, by then, I'm in my, gosh, we're talking 15 years ago, I'm in my 40s, right? Literally counting pennies going, okay, can't stay at the Ritz-Carlton tonight. I'm going to have to stay at the Motel 6 in Commerce, California, because it's $49 a night, because I kind of got to get through this, right? I got to get through this. And I didn't know where it was going, but I was learning every day about this thing called new media and delivery by this thing called streaming and buffering and all these things that we know today. In 2006 was a brand new frontier. And people looked at me going, you're effing crazy, man. You're producing TV shows and traveling around. You're going to do this internet TV. What, you're not good enough to do regular TV? You got to do internet TV? And let alone, you're not even doing real Hollywood stuff. You're doing Chinese internet TV and Spanish internet TV. And what the hell are you doing? This was just different friends and social circles looking at me like I was nuts. But my wife knew that this was something, and she always said to me, she goes, you were always a little early. You were always a little early, but now you're not early. You might be onto something. If you really believe in this, you continue to stay on this path. And I stayed on this path, and one day I get this phone call from a headhunter that said, hey, we're looking for somebody to be the executive vice president of a company that does streaming, and there's only a handful of guys that do what they do, and you're one of them, and are you interested in this job? And the area code of the call was from San Diego, California. I'm like, oh my God, I got to drive to San Diego now? And they're going, well, actually, the job is in Redwood City, California. I'm like,
Nice.
oh my God, I live 5 minutes from Redwood City. I'll take the job. And it was like quadruple the pay, and it was like a real executive job. And suddenly I got into this world where I'm working with major platforms with good funding. And I was able to take the knowledge of learning how to run teams and manage teams, doing things on a budget, working in this new media. And every day I went to work, it was like going to college. And it was literally like getting a master's degree, because the world was changing so quickly. Platforms were changing. And I literally went through several other jobs, which is very typical in Silicon Valley. And I kind of moved my way up to different jobs, higher and higher and higher. And I ended up at a very cool startup called Crunchyroll in 2012. And Crunchyroll was a company that was only 5 years old. I was a 40th employee. And it ended up becoming one of Silicon Valley's greatest success stories. Ended up selling for $900 million to AT&T. Fortunately, I was part of an executive team. I was a C-level executive, a chief content officer for the company, which really gave me a lot of street cred. So when I left that company in 2016, by then, I really did know what I was doing by then. There was no longer faking it till I was making it. I really put in the time, because I'd spent almost 10 years in new media, and I'd seen every iteration happen, literally. And so I decided by that point, things were going very, very well in my life. And I decided I'm going to start my own company, and I'm just going to, run my own company and help content providers get on streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon. And because I knew the path to get content up there, because that's what I did. Right. And I ended up at a conference, and I got approached by an agent, and he goes, hey, congratulations, I heard that you just left Crunchyroll. I followed what you've done. It's very cool. I have a guy I'd like to introduce you to. I think you guys would be great business partners. And I'm like, I'm not looking for a business partner right now. I'm kind of happy just kind of being a solo guy. And it's like, no, I think this guy could really help you. And I said, okay, who is he? And the guy ended up becoming Mehmet Oz, better as Dr. Oz.
Okay.
And Dr. Oz is Turkish. And what a lot of people don't realize is one of the most watched programs in the world besides Hollywood movies are Turkish dramas.
Really?
Huge. And it's because Turkish people have what we call ethnically ambiguous. You can't tell if they're European, Latino, or so you can dub them in Spanish or Portuguese or French or German or Italian. And the dramas are family friendly and have all the elements of telenovelas and soap operas, and they're huge. And Dr. Oz was so proud of his Turkish background. He said, look, I think that I would love to see Turkish dramas become mainstream like the way anime and Korean dramas are. And I know you're an expert in international streaming content. I said, great. So we became business partners. We took on a couple of very, very high level investors and board members. One of them is actually, I understand you're from Minnesota,
yes.
Right?
Yep.
So my chairman is actually from Minnesota, very, very well-known Minnesota entrepreneur, one of the most successful guys in your area. His name is Nasser Kazmini.
Okay.
And with Nasser, he brought in a group of investors that have helped start Jungo, which now include former founders of Allegiant Airlines, one of the biggest real estate developers in the world, one of the biggest developers of telecommunications in Eastern Europe. And our most recent board member and shareholder is the very famed John Sculley, the former CEO of Apple Computer.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And so, the idea behind Jungo in the beginning was we were going to be like, think of it like international Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
But as the world started changing so much, we started seeing that the adoption was not toward streaming services that you pay for, because there's only a few that you can pay for, Disney and Paramount and Netflix. The business was really going toward ad-supported programming.
Right.
Think of it like YouTube. That's ad-supported.
Mm-hmm.
You watch a video for free, but you got to watch some ads, right? And that's the business where I was able to take all of my knowledge of what people like to watch, putting on devices that became easy to watch it on. It's the any place, anywhere, anytime model for free. And Jungo today, I'm happy to report, I'm available on 1.8 billion devices with 350 million monthly subscribers that watch our content and our channels across platforms all over the world. We've built this amazing company that operates in, now I have employees in Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Mumbai, India, Manila, Philippines. We're truly a worldwide organization and a group of extremely passionate, and extremely skilled people that all love what they do. Not all of them came, by the way, from streaming media, because streaming media is so young, but they all have one quality, which is the way that I hire people, which is what I learned in football from Bill Walsh, which is don't go by a resume of what someone does or what they did or what their past successes are. Hire people that have good character and are wickedly smart.
Nice.
Because if you do that, they will learn what they need to learn, but they will have the ethics and you will always trust them. And that's what I'm so proud to say that's what we have today. Nearly 100 employees that every single one of them I respect so much. Every one of them is smarter than me, and are passionate about what they do, and now operate this thing, on a global level. And most recently, how we met was I kind of wanted to circle back to martial arts because, it's obviously my passion, what I love. And I thought, what better way to do it than to have a martial arts channel? So the first channel that I started 3 years ago was called Combat Go, but it's really more of a fighting channel, MMA, and that really is not my DNA, but it was commercially very viable. At the time, Century Martial Arts had bought Black Belt magazine. Black Belt was still kind of a legacy media company, with newspaper and some elements of web, a little bit of social media, and I've known the owners of Century for many, many years, and we came together a couple of years ago, and we said, let's launch Black Belt Magazine Television Network, a network that would focus on martial arts instruction, martial arts entertainment, martial arts philosophy, and targeted toward the martial artists, not necessarily people that want to watch the UFC, because there's channels if you want to watch UFC. You go to ESPN. Combat Go, you can watch kickboxing and other combat sports. Let's create a channel that's for the martial artists. And we started Black Belt Magazine Television about 6-7 months ago. And we decided that we wanted to create some original programming around it. And so one of the programs that we created talk shows we have one called The Master's Way, another one called Mano a Mano, hosted by former UFC champion legend Nate Quarry, and also co-hosted by former NFL free safety and BJJ enthusiast Tony Parrish, who's also the head of our global content. And then we looked at other creative programs, and there was always a cool program that a lot of us remember affectionately growing up called Kung Fu Theater.
Yes. So
we decided, let's bring back Kung Fu Theater. And who better to host it than the queen of Kung Fu, Cynthia Rothrock. And again, this is where I am in my life. Cynthia and I at one time, we had a relationship. We were together for several years, and then we weren't for many, many years. And, we didn't talk to each other for many years, but now we're all grown up. Mm-hmm. Guess what? We can all work together, and it's awesome. Nice. And it's awesome. And we and I looked at saying, how do we branch out the audience besides just people that are in martial arts, and how do we grow the audience? And there's a young man that I met a few years ago that did some voiceover work for me, Stefan Johnson, who you're friends with.
Yep.
And I said, Stefan, I think this would be very cool as a co-host. You bring on a different type of energy and knowledge that is different, and you bring on a different audience from TikTok and social media. And he goes, George, I'm not a karate guy. I said, I don't want you to be a karate guy. I got a karate person, Cynthia Rothrock, but I want another element to it, a comedic element. Another way to look at it. It's the same way that we approached the West Coast demo team, many years ago, take things out of the box. And that's what we did. And so this newest show is called Black Belt Theater. And, we have movies that range from Bruce Lee's Chinese Connection to No Retreat, No Surrender to, Black Belt Samurai to to new movies that were made in LA 3 months ago. So that's kind of, the journey, how it's kind of come full circle for me of keeping martial arts still into the love affair that I have with media today. I'm able to still honor the martial arts that was so good to me.
That's awesome. What an awesome story. And I love it. I mean, ever since I first heard about it, I've been tuning in and checking it out. And I'm glad that we can now download previous stuff because usually I'm gone on Saturday nights. So
yeah, no problem. Yeah.
No, that's great. But no, I'm just, it's so excited for your success. And I love it. There's so many of these martial arts programs that people maybe haven't seen in a long time or don't get a chance to see. And it's just cool to, and the commentary, like you said, the two of them work well together on Black Belt Theater, and they're great partners on that one. So you picked a good team for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So to jump around a little bit, let's say someone approaches you and they're thinking of getting involved in martial arts. They've never done it in their life, and they're looking for some tips. What is something some tips you'd give them? What to look for in a school? What to look for in an instructor?
Well, two things. One is, I know this is going to sound crazy because it needs to be convenient. You could find the greatest instructor that's 50 miles away, but in the beginning, if it's not convenient, you're not going to go.
Right.
And it needs to be something that you can do because in the beginning, it's not going to be easy. And you have to stick with it. There's going to be times you're going to want to quit. So it needs to be convenient enough for you to be able to get there, train, go home, rest. I mean, there has to be convenience to it. And then the second thing, you have to have a good feel for the compatibility of your instructor. If you like instructors that are going to push at you and yell at you and scream at you, that's the instructor that's going to be best for you. And if you need an instructor that's quiet and polite and approaches it differently, that's what you need. And if you need someone that's just hyper and motivating, that's what you need. If you like being trained with a man, or if you like being trained by a woman, if you want somebody old, if you want somebody young, you have to go where you feel comfortable. Because in the beginning, what will keep you going back is to eliminate excuses, because it's good. You're going to say, oh, it's too far. The guy's too mean. Person can't relate to me. They're too old. They can't relate. They're too young. They're not mature. All these things could come up in your thought process, and you want to try to eliminate as many of those as possible. And I know I'm thinking way deep, but I also know the reason why people quit after so many years.
Yep.
It's because I've heard every one of these excuses. It's too far. Classes aren't convenient for me. It's too hard. It's too tough. I have different priorities. Can't make class. I don't like the instructor. They're not motivating. They're too motivating. I've heard them all. So I think that you almost have to approach, and you can approach martial arts the same way that you go buy clothes. Things have to fit you, right?
Right.
And then you have to also let your instinct take over a little bit, and you say, does this feel right for me? Does it feel right for me? And if it does, then it's good for you. And that's why Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do both exist. And now Eagle Fang. Because everybody has a different approach.
Yep.
And everybody likes it a little bit different. But my advice is you have to really look at it. We spend more time thinking about buying a car or what we're going to binge watch sometimes than we make in joining a martial arts school or a fitness instructor,
True.
When that person may end up having much more influence in our life.
That's a good point.
The car that we drive or the show that we're going to watch. So, just study and be aware of what you're getting into and really shop before you jump in and make a commitment.
Nice. Great answer. So if you had to pick, I'm probably have a good guess on the answer, but if you had to pick one martial artist that you just truly admire, who would that be?
Well, of course, it's Ernie Reyes is one, because he was my teacher, my mentor, a person that really has gone and really has become, very true to it. But there's a few other martial artists that I really have grown to respect and admire. A few of them, and I'll tell you who they are. And believe it or not, I've never trained with them.
Okay.
I've never trained with them. But people like Tyree Cassell and Dennis Brown. Dennis Brown once told me that there's a generation of people today that compete just because they love to compete, but not because they love martial arts. And he says, I am a martial artist and it will be with me throughout my entire life. And I'll never forget, I had the honor of meeting Linda Lee. We did an NFL event and I invited Linda to come because we were honoring Bruce Lee for a martial arts day it was an Oakland Raiders event. And because of my connections with the NFL, So we did a martial arts tribute to Bruce Lee, and special guest was Linda Lee, and we had all these martial arts schools do a halftime show. And I got a chance to spend time with Linda Lee, but Linda Lee spent about 3 hours with my wife and told my wife a story, who then told me the story. And what Linda Lee told my wife was this: Bruce Lee was a martial artist who was also an actor, but first and foremost, he was a martial artist. Brandon was an actor who did martial arts, but Bruce was the martial artist. Bruce was fascinated, lived and died by martial arts, more important than anything else in the world. And that's what, that's what kept this fascination and motivation. The older I get, the more I appreciate that.
Oh,
the
definitely.
fact that if you really love martial arts, it's no longer about the competition. It's no longer about the trophies. It's no longer about the accolades. It's really just doing something that you love. And people ask me all the time, hey, do you still do martial arts? And although when you look at my dad bod, you might not believe that I do. But at 6:30 this morning, I was stretching and doing roundhouse kicks.
Nice.
And I still love it. And I'm still fascinated by it. And I still love to devour and read about it and watch it and all those things. And so for those reasons, I respect people that still are in love with the martial arts and preach the martial arts, because they, in their heart, and warriors are martial artists. They are real martial artists. And so a couple of people that I really admire and respect, like I said, Ernie Reyes, Tyree Cassell, Dennis Brown, just great martial artists that have spent their life at it. And I also have tremendous respect and honor for some of the people that have taught me over the years. I was very, very blessed to have trained with Remy Presas, who was a Filipino arnis master. I spent 4 years of private training with Remy in San Francisco. Literally every Saturday, drive up there and train with him. It was an honor to be able to do arnis with him, one-on-one with him. Toshiro Oshiro from Redwood City, California, who taught me Kabuto weapons. And then I also had an opportunity to train with and have exposure to different martial arts like Kempo. I got to learn some Kempo with John Sepulveda. I got to experience Wushu with Anthony Chan. And even Cynthia Rothrock taught me a lot about Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. All these people to this day are still very much involved in martial arts. And they still, what keeps them going still are martial arts. They still love martial arts, and they train every day, and they're inspiring. They're 70, some of them are almost 80 years old, and they still train. And it's not because of a trophy or because of an award or an accolade. It's because that's how they're wired. They just love to train, and they love to continually grow. And that inspires me. So despite the fact that, I live in Hollywood, and I'm literally looking at Hollywood as I speak. I'm literally looking outside my window. On one hand, it's really easy to become jaded about things, but I'm still like a 5-year-old or 12-year-old when you hear me talk about how excited I still am about martial arts.
You can hear it in your voice. That's awesome.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. So is there one philosophy you've learned throughout all your years in martial arts that you keep coming back to that's super important to you?
Humility.
Nice.
Didn't learn it in martial arts.
Oh, okay.
Learned it from Joe Montana.
Oh.
Who to me is a martial artist. Joe Montana, for as great as he is, because he was the original GOAT before Tom Brady was the original GOAT, was one of the kindest, most respectful, humble man you will ever meet in your life. And I thought about it for many, many years, and I thought, if Joe Montana, with all the greatness, can be so humble, we all have a lesson to learn from him. It's not about how good we are or how hard we work at something or our accomplishments. It really is how we treat other people. And so it's something that to this day, I think it's so important to be kind to people and to be respectful to people, regardless of where they are in their life. Because what a lot of people don't realize is your words and your actions can definitely affect people negatively and positively. And we don't always say things, at the time or treat people the way that we should. And we can't take things back. So what we can do as we grow and become older is to learn those lessons. And as we advance in our years, to take those things. And for me, it's learning that being humble and staying hungry is so important, because by being humble and hungry, you will never think that you are the greatest or that you are untouchable or unbeatable. And you will always strive to be better, because there is always somebody that's going to be better than you. There's always going to be somebody stronger and faster. And so the best thing to do is to stay humble and to stay focused, and that will keep you on your path.
Nice. Very great answer. All right, I got a few fun ones to wrap it up here. Do you have a favorite martial arts book?
It was Modern Arnis and Dynamic Kicks.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's technique books. And then, of course, martial arts philosophy books. It is the Joe Himes book. Oh my God.
Zen in the Martial Arts.
Zen in the Martial Arts. It's been a while.
My guest yesterday said the same book. That's the only reason it was right on the top of my head there. So it was a great book. Nice. Okay. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
I'm embarrassed to say I'm not up to date on all of them. I started watching a little bit of Bruce Lee's the Warrior series, the one, and then I'm also watching right now Wu Assassins, which I'm kind of digging. Wu Assassins.
That's a fun show.
Yeah.
And it could be an old one. It can be an old classic one too. It doesn't have to be a modern one.
You know, to be honest with you, I really love Karate Kid. I really do. I'm liking the Cobra Kai series right now.
Yes,
I'm really digging it, and part of it is also my office is in North Hollywood on Lancashire Avenue. Okay. And in the last episode, it was like, meet us at Lancashire and Magnolia. And I'm like, I think there's like a Vietnamese pho shop there.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. All right. And favorite martial arts movie?
It's going to be, the obvious is, of course, it's going to be Enter the Dragon.
Right.
And I would say not necessarily in that order, would be Enter the Dragon, Return of the Dragon, possibly in the more modern, going to because every era, I thought it's almost impossible to judge them because they're all so differently.
Right.
Jackie Chan, Meals on Wheels, just because, he was pretty amazing. As you can see, I'm not super deep philosophically. I like my eyes to be entertained.
Yep.
Right.
I'm the same.
and anything with Jim Kelly.
Ah, very cool. Nice. Okay. Now this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie, but do you have a favorite martial arts fight scene?
Great question.
That's a new one I just added a couple, maybe 5-6 episodes ago. I started asking that one.
Well, yeah, there's a couple. One is laugh. Jim Kelly, Enter the Dragon. 2 cops pull him over. He uses the ridge hand technique to beat up cops. Who does that? Who uses the ridge hand technique? Okay. Who uses the ridge hand?
Jim Kelly does.
Jim Kelly does. Okay. Of course, probably the scene that took everyone's breath away is the Bruce Lee fight scene against Bob Wall, where Bob Wall grabs his leg and he does the flip backwards and kicks him. I mean, it changed the game for everybody. It was like, whoa, wait a minute, what just happened?
Yep.
What just happened, right? And of course, I would say the most iconic would be Bruce Lee in the karate studio taking on 27 karate instructors using the nunchaku. Again, it was one of those things that you're like, wait, what is he doing? Because you almost think there's like, it almost created this like pop culture shift that suddenly, what are those 2 sticks? And now everyone in America is going to have 2 sticks.
Of course.
And they're not going to pronounce it right. They're going to call them nunchucks, but it will forever be part of pop culture.
That's awesome. Some great answers there. Nice. George, I want to thank you so much. This has been so much fun. What a story, man. What a life. I love what you've done and how you've managed to keep martial arts involved in so many aspects of your life throughout your career and stuff. And I definitely love what you're doing at JungoPlus and especially Black Belt Theater. And I'm going to put links out there for everything and encourage many times for my listeners to go and watch that for sure.
Truly appreciate it, Brian. Keep doing what you're doing. This is great stuff.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.